I was born in Jamaica, St. Thomas.
Okay. And could you describe where St. Thomas is and what kind of a place it is?
St. Thomas is situated in the east of Jamaica, and it's a parish. Can't remember how many inhabitants or what the population there is, but it's mainly an agricultural industrial area, and mainly, residents do carry out farming as a source of livelihood, but there were a few factories, such as the Goodyear, as in Wolverhampton, and there were a button factory some years ago, I suppose in the 60s, if I remember correctly, and there was the telephone factory and brush and broom factory, and in the remote part going to Portland, which is an adjoining parish, there is the cane factory. I left there over 30 years ago, so I just remember bits of it.
The cane is an important part of the area.
Yes, cane, bananas, and coffee. It's an important part of the area.
And what was your family experience like? Where did they work and what field?
Well, my family, my father was a policeman, and my mother was a housewife, although we had lots of land, and she used to produce from the land.
What did she produce?
We had coffee, chocolate, bananas, lime, and can't remember anything else. Mm-hmm. Yeah, citrus and
Right, and these things were sold locally?
Yes, or they would be taken to the capital in Kingston to be sold. Mm-hmm.
Right, and so the style of life is much more sort of, the land is very important, and people live much more from the land.
Yes, but the connotation with the land, the connotation with slavery and the land was something that people didn't want to do. Right, although unless it was on a large scale, as in the landowners, because during slavery the slaves weren't allowed to own lands, and what emerged after slavery was the mulattoes, the fairer skinned people who owned the land and monopolized the economy of Jamaica then. So the land was linked actually with slavery, unless you owned lots and lots of land.
Right. And so how then did people begin to start making their lives? Was their interest more towards professional jobs rather than agricultural?
There were interest more towards professional, but through education. It was definitely interest in education, and education was seen as the vehicle actually to acquire a status or to be socially mobile. And but bearing in mind that because of the legacy that was reaped from slavery, in that the fairer people were seen in places of positions rather than the darker skinned people.
So colour was always
always an issue until we got independence in 1962.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But freedoms from slavery, as I understand, was 1862?
1865. 1865, yeah.
And that's a day that is celebrated by all the community?
Yes, and well, as far as I remember, until I left Jamaica in 1964.
How important is that day then?
Very important, because it was seen as a day of freedom, and perhaps it's not celebrated so much as because Independence Day supersedes the 1st of August. But certainly in my mother's time, when she was younger, it was celebrated more and seen as an important day. In fact, it was a national day, declare a national holiday.
And is it a day that connects the community? Is it a day that is celebrated with everybody together?
Yes, yeah, just as Independence Day, yes.
And what kind of celebrations happen in your community? What were they like?
Well, if I remember correctly, there used to be dances, and people celebrated in many ways. Those who go to church. Those who have street parties and dancing and so forth.
So they were fun days?
Yeah, fun days,
yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then, also you mentioned education and how education is a vehicle to gaining a profession. What was your experience of education in your family? Was it very important to your mother?
Yeah, it was very important to my parents. Always pushed us through, for education, in terms of admittedly there were 8 of us, but although they couldn't afford, because even though my father was a policeman, his pay was really very small. He complemented his pay with carpentry work, and they would encourage us to do well at school, even though they couldn't afford to send us to sort of grammar school in those days, because even then Jamaica doesn't have a structure where, although education is free for all, you still have to pay for higher education. And so it was difficult then. But I personally went to school from I was 4.
So did that mean that because education wasn't available to everybody, was it more valued in your family?
I think it was valued in most families, and most people wanted their children to do well. I mean, I can remember children from very poor families even becoming doctors and lawyers and that, because parents would sacrifice to make sure that the children get through and get the best education there is once they have the ability.
Having spoken to Bishop Brown this morning, and he talked about this, he was saying that for his family, education was important for him because his mother never had the chance to have an education in the same way. Was that similar to your experiences?
Yes, it was similar to my experience, because my mom was an only child, and she lost her mom when she was 17, and her dad died abroad. So she never had the chance to go through sort of the education system. My dad was more educated in that he had the chance to be a policeman, even though he felt that he could have gone further. But it was very important to us.
Right, and so before you came over, what significance did Britain have as a symbol of the empire?
Well, I think Britain was seen as the mother country, and in fact we learned more about Britain at school than we did of Jamaica.
Right.
And so we knew quite a lot about Britain when we came here, and because Jamaica was one of the British Commonwealth as well. The symbolic thing about that is that, and my father was encouraged to come because he thought he would make a better way of, he would make a better way of living for his family, and would work for perhaps 5 years and return home to a better lifestyle.
that's quite common that everyone had the experience.
Yeah.
They'd come for a short time.
Yes, that's
maybe,
right.
and then go back.
Yeah.
And more people ended up staying.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And so then, would you say you knew more about British history than you did about your own African history?
Yes, yeah. Because I felt that the African history wasn't taught, and also because most of the history was verbal, there was not much written, certainly in the Caribbean. And of course, people felt that slavery was something to be ashamed of.
Right. So your perception of Jamaican nationality, was it something that was very connected to British Empire and things like that?
I think when I was younger, yes, but as I grew older, and certainly when I went back to the Caribbean, I am more assertive in that I felt that I belonged to Jamaica, and I still maintain my identity and be proud to be who I am and where I came from. And
then just to mention then the role maybe of you said you had 8 brothers?
7 brothers and sisters. Yeah.
Where were you then in the family?
I'm 5th.
You were the 5th?
Yeah.
And so what was your experience of childhood like?
Yeah, doing everything. They have to be sort of look after the smaller ones, and was very sort of industrious.
Yeah, it was a hard-working family.
It was a hard-working family, yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so then, how did your education begin? Was it in Jamaica?
It began when I left. I finished school at 17 when I was on my way here. So I came here in Jamaica. The school system then was different in that you never had secondary school. You had one school, what we went to call all-age school, and you would stay there until you were 17, 18. And after 16, you would go up to start to take your exams, what is known as Jamaica third year, first, second, and third year, and that's equivalent to A-levels standard. And then you would either go on to university or go abroad or
and so you finished that stage?
Well, I never finished that stage. I never got to third year. Right. Because I came here when I was 17 plus.
And you came with your father?
No. Our parents came before, and we were left with a relative, and then our parents sent for us. 5 of us came together.
So then, just to go back a step, your family network was very important to you in Jamaica.
Oh yes, we
and it meant that your parents could go away and you'd still remain in a network of family.
Family, yes.
And was that an experience that was reflected by a lot of people who were emigrating?
Yes. They were either left with sort of grandparents, auntie, uncles. We were left with our cousin because my parents never had, my mother never had any sister, and my father relatives just had 2 brothers and 1 sister who wasn't very close.
Right. Was that a sad experience? How did you see it as your parents when they were away? Was it an expectation that your parents would just simply go away?
Well, I think we understood. I mean, for me, I understood why they had to go. And so it was just accepted as a fact of life, really. Yeah.
So money and work was much more important.
Well, it was in that, we just thought that you could get a lot of things that you could normally get if they were around.
And So then, what did you think England would be like before you came?
I thought, well, I don't know, I conjure up an image of sun similar to Jamaica. I was quite disappointed when I came.
Really? When did you arrive? Do you remember what day it was? What time?
Yeah, I think it was a Tuesday. It was in May, the 18th of May, 1964, and it was absolutely cold and foggy. When I got to London and when we got on the coach to come to Birmingham then, and I thought, oh God, what a lot of factories. And my mom said, oh, it's not factories, they are houses.
Really? Did that disappointment extend for quite a while?
Yes, yeah, I cried actually. Really? Yes. Yeah.
And was it very difficult? What did you find most difficult about?
Well, I think the difficulty was to settle down and to accept, people didn't even understand. I mean, for instance, I remember Millie Small, she was very at the top of the chart, singing My Boy Lollipop. And then everybody would think that you're Millie Small. And I remember when I got my first job in Birmingham, and it was working in a factory, and I was paid £2.4 and 6 a week. And you were just there, and there was nobody from my sort of district or background. I remember there were 2 African girls, and the culture was quite different, and we were in a stranger in a strange place. So it was very daunting, actually.
Was it? Was it at times very isolating?
Yes, yeah. Mm.
And then, did you begin to miss home?
Yeah, very much so. I cried for probably a whole month. Yeah. Mm.
And what you spoke that your parents had a 3-year plan when they came home, a 5-year plan.
5-year plan, yeah. Mm.
What was your plan when you came home?
Well, in fact, I've always wanted to be a doctor when I was young. And I felt that, perhaps if I got the chance, I could, do well, to go back to college and get my qualification into medical school. But then I thought that maybe I was too old to do that.
Why did you think you were too old?
Well, I was 17, coming 18, and I just thought that, from an early age in Jamaica, if I was in Jamaica, I would have taken my 3rd year probably on my way to university.
Mm. So you were looking to find education in England?
Yes, yeah.
And did you find it?
Yes and no. I remember when I started to work, and then I used to go to school at night. And by the time you got home from work, you were absolutely tired and have to go to school again.
So how long were your days?
I spent about a year at evening classes, and then I went into nursing.
So you were very busy.
Yeah.
And you had to have a job in order to support yourself.
Yes, yeah.
And then at the same time, you were studying so as to make a career.
Well, to get into somewhere, yes.
How difficult was that?
It was difficult in that I think I had to overcome some of the cultural barriers. There certainly was racism, I think, but it wasn't identified as such. You just thought that you were in a strange country, you were actually a stranger, and obviously, probably you might be treated different.
So would you say you had an unclear notion of racism?
Yes, yes,
okay.
Yeah.
So would you say that came a lot later, didn't it, in people's experiences?
It came a lot later for me. And it's when I went back and came back that I realized that, yes, this was racism.
Yeah. So then, for the first time that you came, would you say your experiences were kind of very difficult to place, to understand what your position was?
Yeah, it was difficult because you felt that, as I said, you felt that you were a stranger in a strange land, and it's almost as if you felt that you have to accept what is given to you. And with that notion, you sort of didn't sort of question. And of course, with in between the first and the second, third, fourth generation, because I'm in the middle, you certainly, our parents never questioned anything. They weren't aware. I felt that then because their vision was to come here and work for 5 years, they never really assimilated.
So do you think, being from Jamaica and being a colony to England, did you think you had a position in England? Did you have a place?
Well, from history and from what I read, I realized that we have a place in the British society, being one of the British colonies and being from the British Commonwealth, and England being the mother country. But somehow you've never felt that you had a place.
And you could never feel British.
And you can never feel, no, I would never feel British. No.
So then the disappointment from the first visit meant that you went home. How did that decision come about to go home?
Well, I got married in the process, and my husband and I went home. He got a job with the Jamaican government, and I got a job with being a nurse.
So did you meet your husband here?
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Okay. And was a lot of your bond to do with the fact that you were immigrants in a new place, and presumably was there less Afro-Caribbean people in Wolverhampton at the time?
I wasn't from Wolverhampton, I was from Birmingham. Yeah. No, it wasn't. I think we had, because my parents also belonged to the Pentecostal church, I think we have almost had our own circle of friends and brethren and church brothers and sisters. So, you have youngsters that you grew up with, and, so there is that nucleus of Jamaicans, if you like, even though many of them were from different parts of Jamaica, but it was that bond coming from the one island. So you almost have people that you grew up with in those days being very close. So, you have that support and community spirit and what have you.
So the church provides much more than just a place of religion.
Yes,
Community.
Yes. There certainly was more bonding and more community spirit and more caring for each other in those days than they are now.
And were you glad to go back to Jamaica then?
It was a new experience because I went back now as an adult, and I could actually have seen quite a bit and been involved in quite a bit, and came back very much more assertive and grown up and knowing what to expect and experience racism and can identify that, and so it was a good experience.
How long were you here before you left again?
I was here 9 years.
9 years
Easy before you left, yeah.
So they must have been the long and hard 9 years then.
It was, yes. In the 60s, and things weren't as they were now.
Right. And what was the? It's difficult. We've said that, but what was the racism like in the 60s then?
In the 60s, it was more blatant in that it was not covert, it was overt. And although I can only say that I've experienced probably a couple of times especially during my not so much my training, but during my work as a nurse. But it was very overt, and there were some places black people were not allowed to go. And you weren't actually, there was a great divide between white and black, and in those days you had the teddy boys and all those, and so it was quite different.
And you were studying in the nursing profession at the time. How about forms of institutional racism at the time?
Well, most of my time when I entered nursing first, I lived in the nurses' home, and you more well, maybe it was compulsory for you to live in, and in those days there were nurses coming into training from all parts of the world. And so we were more or less one little family from different parts of the world. So it wasn't sort of identified as such. You were more treated like children rather than racism. I mean, the matron would make sure you are in bed before 9 o'clock or whatever. You were only allowed to go out once a week and stay out till 12. All other days you have to be in before 11 o'clock. And so it was more or less a more caring role, but more or less like a mother-children sort of relationship. So you just do as you're told. So you weren't, you didn't identify it as racism. I think the only time that I identified racism was a couple of times when patients said, "Take your black hands off me," or something like that, and you felt that you only felt, well, if they don't want you to look after them, then that's it.
Yeah, after all, you're a nurse.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So then, what did you like about Jamaica then when you went back the second time?
I think it was. I think I was more political aware, and I went into a time when it was very political. We had Norman Manley and talking about capitalism and socialism, and then you have the other party talking about rights and capitalism. Well, one party was socialism and the next one was capitalism. So it was the height of the political climate in Jamaica. And I felt it was an experience in that I've never experienced anything like it before. In that I remember that I worked as a nurse in the rural area, and then I went on to the urban area in Kingston, and it was almost like a different country actually. In that, in the urban area, I mean, in the height of the political climate, there were crime, guns, and we had gunshots and all sorts, and people coming in wounded by gun and all that. So it was a different experience from when I was younger. It was a peaceful, everybody care about each other. You might hear the one-off incidents, but, and it would be a shock to everyone if somebody did ever get even burgled in the early days when I was there. To compare, so society was more divided there. And but in that you've got there was still a community spirit, a sense of belonging, and a sense that you could relate to one another. And I think, and it's really, it helps me in that it helped me to be more aware and be able to identify who I am.
Sometimes you can think of politics has a lot of anger, and especially that period there's a lot of anger, and that's very different to the peace of community. How did you feel about that anger that was going on in society?
Well, I felt that it was more than just between the people. I felt that it was outside influence as well, and I felt that it was to do with the haves and the haves not. So a lot of it was socioeconomic factors, and a lot of it was because people were inclined to vote, if you like, for whichever party they thought would provide for their needs. And that was influenced by outside agents and outside countries. So that was something that I felt very strong about in that. And I almost agree with the other party who talked about socialism in that, because that made people more self-reliant and be more aware, if you like. So
poverty and the state of the nation was a concern.
Yeah.
And I guess it always has been for the Caribbean, being as, because it's much more like a third world nation, isn't it? And this is, I guess, this channels through into the people.
Well, it's yes, you could say that poverty was a major issue, but at the same time, people did not and still don't realize the resources that they have. Because, for instance, Jamaica has backside, it has oil, it has, and the land is very rich and very fertile. But people don't really realize what they've got. And because of they only see industrialization as a means of, getting wealth, when it's not. So it's more about education rather than, lack of education rather than really poverty.
Right, I see. And then how your experiences, you worked in the nursing profession in Jamaica. Did that make you more prepared and more experienced as a nurse?
Yes, and it made me, it was, when I started, it was a culture shock really, because you took it for granted that, for instance, in England, everything is available. And there you have to, what's the word I'm looking for? You have to improvise really in many instances. But at the end of the day, it prepared you to work in any condition and anywhere, especially in the rural area. Because where I worked in Black River Hospital, that's, was under-resourced, poorly resourced. But when I worked in Kingston at the Mona, the University of the Hospital of the West Indies, that is compared to Queen Elizabeth here, where everything was, and it's a different contrast completely.
Right. So you get your highs
and the lows, yeah.
And you say your husband. What did your husband work in?
He was he works in collective taxes. So
he had a governmental
role, yes. Yeah.
And so you obviously felt that you had a strong position in society.
Well, you were more respected in that, respected for who you are more. And for instance, in the district where we lived, people were more respectful of you, and
that's a very important.
That's very important. Yeah.
And so then, why then come back to England?
I think that mainly because most of my family were still here, and the children, they wanted to come back. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how old were the children?
They came back 11 and 2.5, and one was 13.
So how did you feel about coming back then?
I think I wanted to come back as well too, because when I went, I went as an enrolled nurse, and I really want to come back to know that the children was a bit older and those one was still young. I wanted to finish my nursing career. That was something I always wanted to do.
Right. Okay. Then what were your impressions the second time of England?
Well, it opened my eyes very much of a lot of things, and one of them was racism, and one that I've experienced, and I saw England for what it was and was not.
In what sense?
In sense that it wasn't the mother country, and there was the similar to Jamaica. There are the haves and haves not, but it's more hidden.
Right.
And
in what ways then? How do you mean?
Well, I saw that you've got the 1% or 5% very wealthy people, and then you have what percent of the population very, very poor.
Yeah, and do you experience that more? Are you at the forefront of that being a nurse?
I experienced that as a nurse, yes. Yeah.
What kind of difficulties and problems has that thrown up? Sort of?
Well, it's thrown up things like homelessness. It throw up things like divide with families not having basic things, children going into care, all sorts of things. And it throws up as well people that are less educated are less informed. So the poorer people are less informed than the rich people for many, many years. It's only over the last 10 years that information really reaching the poorer class.
And so then, your position in your family coming back, what was how did you view your new position in society as a black woman practicing as a nurse in England?
Well, I think you have to be more assertive, certainly, and you have a lot of different pressures that I didn't have in the Caribbean. Pressures from surviving in the workplace, pressure, for your children, making sure children going to the right school or get the right education, pressure from standing in the queue and realize that you might be under suspicion being a black person, or even not being served or being ignored. I mean, the constant pressure of being reassuring yourself that I'm black, but I'm just as good as anybody else, where you don't have that in the Caribbean.
Yeah. And so then, what helps to become more established?
Well, I think that for me personally, my faith helped me a lot. And it's always something that I can hold on to. And knowing that, God cares for me regardless of who I am. And it gives me some sort of peace and also assertiveness in that, we are all human beings and there's only one race, that's the human race. And regardless of how people see you because of the color of your skin, you're just as good as them, or if not better.
Yeah. And so do you think that the the spiritual element of the church has gone into your everyday life?
Well, yes, the church helps to help you when you come together. You can identify it, but the difficulty with that is that you only been in that situation once a week, perhaps. Is having to survive for the next 6 days for the week, and you have to have more than just the church.
Such as then, what then? Your family and workplace.
Your family. Well, I wouldn't say workplace in a way, because I think that workplace, there's always that subtle undercurrent of racism, institutional racism, being underneath, and you can, because you've experienced it, you can pick it up so quickly. And it's almost that you think that, well, I'm just here for 8 hours or whatever, then I go home and I'm in my own environment, I'm being in control then. And I think that's the difficult thing to cope with. Whereas in the Caribbean, work for me was a pleasure, because I go and you don't have that. You don't have racism. You might have differences, yes, because we're all human beings with, differences, regardless of what community or you find yourself in. But it's not that constant threat, because racism is a very difficult thing to deal with. It threatens your very existence, and in every way. So that's quite difficult to deal with.
Right. I'd like to ask you if things have got better, but before I ask you that, I wanted to ask you which of the aspects of racism do you most dislike? You talked about racism in the street, the constant need to have attention for your safety, and then you get the racism of the workplace and everything, and the difficulty of work. Which do you say is the worst quality of the...
I think institutional racism, because if for blatant and overt racism, one can deal with, because you know where it's coming from. With institutional racism, you don't know where it's coming from, and it's not racism that tells you, oh, you're black or whatever name they want you're being called, but it's one that stops your very progress, and that's worst, because you can't get anywhere. It's like you would be locked in a box trying to get out and can't get out.
Right. And then how important is it to challenge people when you confront situations?
Well, it's important to challenge, but you can challenge, for instance, in an institutional racism where you have racism ingrained in the institution, it's very difficult to challenge. And you can have to almost develop other strategies to cope with that, and to deal with that, and to get ahead.
Right, okay. So, have things got better?
I would say yes and no. Yes, it got better in that you don't find you may be able to walk on the street without being called nigger or whatever, or names. But no, because you've got institutional racism that stop your progress.
Right, okay. And how comfortable are you then sharing with the white community and being part of Wolverhampton and everything? Do you feel your part is still as in the black community, or do you feel a part of Wolverhampton on a broader scale?
I feel that I'm a part of the black community, but I've also feel that I'm a part of Wolverhampton, and I feel that I have a responsibility to make a difference.
Right. Okay. And I know that this is important in your work as well, which is your work has now taken you to the position where. Could you explain your role and what you do?
Well, I'm a health promotion specialist for the working with the Black community for mainly sexual health. But as because of my experience, I do work in a variety of other areas, and in particular in hypertension and diabetes and stroke. And I felt that it's not just, I'm not only working in this area because I like to work in the area. I feel that I am called to work in this area. And I see it almost as a mission, and to make a difference to the Black community in terms of helping them to look after themselves, and also to be there representing the community at strategic level, and to inform my colleagues and service providers about our service need to shape for the Black community.
How different is the practical evidence, practical advice that you have to give for members of the Black community in health issues, for instance?
How difficult. It's much better than when I started 15 years ago, in that because people were so marginalized, and I think to a certain extent they're still marginalized and disadvantaged. It's almost that, you can't know as much to come and tell me, or inform me. But now I feel that I have built up enough relationship, or I've built up confidences that people now of more recipient of the advice that I'll give. And also I think because I'm more known as well in the community.
Which helps.
Yeah, it helps, yeah.
And then do you think that a lot of the problems are born out of an economic inequality?
Yeah, socio-economic factors, and a lot of the health problems emerge as a result of that. Because, for instance, hypertension, which is affects about 1 in 3 African Caribbeans, is as a result of worrying and the oppression that people find themselves in on a day-to-day basis. And because of that impacted on nearly every area of their lives. And the inequalities that they experience in receiving services, whatever that may be, do have an impact on their lives.
And culturally speaking, then, how marginalised are the Black community just from being a different cultural group?
Well, I think when we talk about the Black community, we are talking about African, Caribbean and Asians community. Both communities experience racism, but maybe in a different way. I think the Asian community experience racism as a result of their culture, the visible culture in terms of dress code, language, and what have you. The African Caribbean community experience racism as a result of stereotyping, of labeling, and of really thinking that, you're a non-contributor to society. So those are the two different experiences. And I feel that information does not reach the Black communities, in particular African Caribbean, because somewhat it's perceived, it seems that people are afraid to approach the community, maybe because of the perception is that the black community is very hostile and, and to get angry and upset and what have you.
So communication is still a barrier that needs to still be worked on.
And the whole perception of
Okay. And after that brief interruption, just a shift in emphasis then. And I wanted to ask you then about raising your children in England and what your experiences have been with that. For that.
I think that overall it's in places, I mean, I've got the most problem I got is my son, and it was difficult for me in terms of, and for him as well, in terms that because black African Caribbean boys are labeled from a very early age, and because they grow bigger and stronger than their white counterpart, I feel that they pose a threat to teachers from the very size. So I had difficulty with them in terms of not so much finding the right school, in the years when Mrs. Thatcher said that, well, you have to send your child to school that's in your area. So that was one obstacle. And the next obstacle was trying to actually get to work in conjunction with the teacher to make sure that his education needs were met. That was not, I was disappointed with that.
Yeah. How much do you have to compensate for the lack of teaching as a mother?
Well, I think not only as a mother, because I taught myself. I was a school teacher in Jamaica, and after when I went back the second time, I taught at secondary school for 3 years. So with that background as well, your expectation is quite high. Yeah. And then when you come to the British education system and see, and see really the things that are happening, and which is more or less unacceptable, in that some of the teachers that I have anything to do with are not really interested in the children.
And so then it's a concern to bring up a child and having a strong identity and his own sense of purpose. And he must have your children must have experienced difficulties such as that.
Yes.
And have you been able to counteract those effects?
Well, I think my son is still struggling in that and it's a different sort of struggle now, because now he's 21, and as a black man in Britain, with all the stereotyping and all the other things, that the perception and the labels that black men carry, he has to carry that. But at the same time, I hope we've given him, that identity, although it doesn't show yet, because he has lots of friends of different, and you have the peer pressure coming in. But that is really, I hope that somewhere along the line that will help him over the barriers.
Mm-hmm. And so then, not just for your children, but for all
the black children,
Asian and Afro-Caribbean.
In particular,
it's a difficult subject.
In particularly the men.
Yeah. Really? Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And why is that? Do you think? that it's more difficult for the men?
Well, I
of
think
these generations.
I think that, as I said before, the labels that they have to carry, the perception. I mean, for instance, you have, the perception of a black man now is drugs, pimp, guns, that kind of label, and a non-contributor living off the states and what have you. So, and this is thrown at them from an early age. And if you look at the figures, the underachievers figures, 50% of the underachievers are African Caribbean boys. Mm-hmm. And that must be telling us something, that it's more than just a label that the community carry. Mm-hmm. And I think that they are disadvantaged from a very early age in the school system. And that has not yet been looked at. It's been talked about, just as mental health has been talked about. But it's not being researched and not being highlighted, and nothing concretely have been done to solve the problems.
And I would say in a way as well that the perceptions of black males in popular culture hasn't helped a lot of the time in some ways. But I mean, just what would you say that the representations of black people in popular culture are like? Do you agree with them, or do you think
popular culture such as what?
As in sort of in music and in television, there's not many roles.
Well, the role models is not there in terms, are not there actually, in terms of for instance, black men who have made it to the top through hard work, through education. So it's not there, and that's where we are deficiting in terms of role models.
So role models is the most important.
Is for black boys in particular. Right.
Yeah. Okay, and then finally, just to round up, are you pleased with your achievements that you've made yourself?
Very pleased, and I have. It is through a lot of struggle, hard work, a lot of tears, but yes, and I have been supported. I have been given tremendous support from the church, from the black community in particular, and from white community as well. I've been given quite a lot of support, especially in Wolverhampton.
Mm-hmm. And how long do you think the struggle will have to go on?
Well, I think that some of us have endeavoured to make a difference, and we can only hope that the struggle that we've made to make a difference will last, and many generations that come in after us will learn from us and have a better time.
Okay,